The emergency lights flashed red across the Great Hall of the Galactic Council. Hundreds of alien representatives sat in curved rows that reached toward the ceiling, their worried whispers filling the massive chamber. On the central display, another world went dark. Admiral Tom watched from the observers section, his weathered face illuminated by the holographic map showing the spread of destruction. As Earth's first representative to the Council, he found himself witnessing history, though not the kind anyone wanted to see. The Ravager swarm has consumed the entire Proxima system, announced First Speaker Bell, his tall, silvery frame trembling slightly. That marks the 47th solar system lost to these beings. The display zoomed in on the crystalline creatures that had brought the galaxy to its knees. They looked beautiful in a terrible way. Massive structures of living crystal that sparkled with stolen energy. Some were as large as moons, others as small as ships, but all shared the same hunger. "They're not just destroying the planets," said Representative Green, her tentacles waving in distress. "They're eating them, converting all matter and energy into more of themselves." Tom leaned forward, studying the footage. Unlike the panicked aliens around him, he felt a spark of curiosity. These Ravagers were certainly deadly, but everything had a weakness. Humanity had only achieved faster than light travel 5 years ago, but they had already learned that the galaxy was full of surprises. The central display showed a recording from the last minutes of Proxima Colony. The Ravagers descended like a crystal rain, their surfaces reflecting the light of the system's star. Where they touched, matter simply disappeared. Buildings, mountains, oceans, all were converted into more crystalline mass. The defensive fleet didn't even slow them down. Another representative shouted, "Energy weapons just make them stronger. Physical weapons shatter them, but the pieces just form new Ravagers. They're learning from every encounter." Tom pulled out his tablet and made notes. The council members were giving valuable information in their panic, and humanity needed every advantage it could get. The Ravagers' expansion pattern was bringing them closer to Earth with each passing month. First Speaker Bell raised his arms for silence. "We must face facts. In 50 years of space exploration, my people never encountered anything like these beings. The oldest races among us, with their million-year histories, have no record of such a species. They came from the dead space between galaxies," Representative Green added. "Our long-range sensors detected their arrival 6 months ago. Since then, they've grown exponentially." Tom stood up, drawing surprised looks from nearby aliens. As an observer, he rarely spoke at these sessions. "Request permission to address the council," he said clearly. The first speaker looked relieved at the interruption. "Granted, Admiral, though I remind the council that Earth is not yet a full member." "Thank you." Tom pointed at the display. "These Ravagers, they're a hive mind, correct? Acting as one organism." "Correct," Bell replied. "We believe they share a quantum-level consciousness. Each crystal, no matter how small, is connected to the whole." "Then they must have a purpose," Tom said. "No being consumes without reason. Even viruses and bacteria follow patterns we can understand, once we study them enough." The chamber grew quiet. Many species had tried to communicate with the Ravagers, but none had succeeded. The crystalline beings ignored all attempts at contact, focused only on their endless consumption. "What would you suggest, Admiral?" Representative Green asked. "Your species is young, but perhaps fresh eyes are what we need." Tom smiled grimly. "Humanity has faced extinction-level threats before, though never on this scale. We survived because we learned to understand our enemies." He gestured at the display. "These beings are efficient, organized, and unstoppable with our current methods, so we stop fighting them head-on. We study them, we learn, and we find out what they want." The council chamber erupted in debate. Tom sat back down, watching the Ravagers' beautiful, deadly dance on the display. Humanity had joined the galactic community expecting wonders. Instead, they found terror in the stars. But where others saw hopelessness, Tom saw a puzzle waiting to be solved. And humans were very, very good at solving puzzles. The red dust of Mars swirled around the dome of Colony 1. Inside, Dr. Wells adjusted her microscope, studying the strange readings from the colony's outer sensors. Something large was moving through the solar system, and it wasn't natural. "Doctor, you need to see this." Her assistant pointed at the main screen. Hundreds of crystalline shapes had appeared at the edge of Mars' orbit, their surfaces gleaming in the distant sunlight. They were Ravagers, and they had finally found Earth's solar system. The emergency alarm blared through the colony. 2,000 colonists rushed to their designated safety zones, though everyone knew the usual safety measures meant nothing against these creatures. They had all seen the footage from other worlds. "Send the alert to Earth," Dr. Wells ordered, her voice steady despite her fear. "And get me Admiral Tom." The Ravagers moved closer, their crystal formations catching the sun's light and breaking it into beautiful, deadly rainbows. The largest one was the size of Earth's moon, while the smallest were no bigger than satellites. They moved as one, like a shoal of fish made of diamond and death. But then something unexpected happened. The Ravagers stopped. Dr. Wells watched in amazement as the crystalline swarm seemed to shudder. The beautiful formations became erratic, their usual smooth movements turning jerky and uncertain. The smaller crystals began pulling away from Mars, retreating toward their larger companions. "They're leaving," her assistant whispered. The main screen lit up with Admiral Tom's face. He looked as surprised as they felt. "Dr. Wells, are you seeing this? The Ravagers are withdrawing from the entire solar system." "Yes, but I don't understand why." She quickly sent him the sensor data. They've never retreated before. Not once in 47 attacks. The crystal swarm was definitely retreating now. Even the largest formations were turning away from Mars, their movements almost seeming fearful. Dr. Wells adjusted the sensors, trying to capture every bit of data she could. "The Council is in chaos," Admiral Tom reported. "Nobody can explain this. Every other world, they attacked without hesitation. What's different about our solar system?" Dr. Wells studied the readings, her scientific mind racing. "Admiral, look at the energy patterns. The Ravagers are actually giving off energy instead of absorbing it. It's like they're burning fuel to get away faster." The next few hours were filled with frantic research. Scientists on Earth and Mars worked together, analyzing every piece of data. The Galactic Council sent their own experts, equally baffled by this first-ever retreat of the unstoppable Ravagers. A week later, Admiral Tom stood in the Mars colony's main lab, looking at Dr. Wells' findings. "You're sure about this? Something about this solar system frightens them," she said, showing him the analysis. "The Ravagers didn't just retreat. They ran. And they're still running. Look at their speed compared to their usual travel patterns." The Admiral nodded slowly. "The Council wants answers. Every species in the galaxy wants to know why the great destroyers turned tail and fled from a bunch of newly spacefaring humans. I have a theory." Dr. Wells pulled up a new set of data. "It's not about our technology or our weapons. It's something more basic. Something about us, or our planets, makes us natural enemies of the Ravagers. Like how some Earth plants produce chemicals that repel certain insects." "Exactly," she smiled. "We're not special because we're advanced, Admiral. We're special because of what we are. Now we just have to figure out exactly what that is." Admiral Tom looked out the window at the red Martian landscape. Somewhere out there in space, the greatest threat the galaxy had ever known was running away from humanity. The question was, why? The answer would change everything. Dr. Wells hadn't slept in 3 days. Her lab on Mars Colony 1 was covered in holographic displays showing test results, chemical analyses, and biological scans. Empty coffee cups littered her desk, evidence of her endless research. "Look at this again," she told Admiral Tom, who had returned to Mars after an emergency council meeting. "Every test shows the same thing. It's in our bones, our blood, even our DNA. The Admiral leaned closer to the display, showing a magnified view of human cell structures. That strange isotope you found. Yes. She pointed to a glowing particle in the image. Earth's unique geological history created it. Billions of years of specific conditions led to this isotope becoming part of all life on Earth. We've been carrying it around since the first cells formed in Earth's oceans. A message alert flashed on the main screen. It was from the Galactic Council's Science Division, confirming Dr. Wells' findings with their own tests. The isotope was unique to Earth life, and it had a strange effect on crystalline structures similar to the Ravagers. "Show him the crystal test," her assistant suggested. Dr. Wells nodded and activated another display. It showed a small crystal sample, similar to the Ravager's structure, sealed in a container. When she added a small amount of the human isotope, the crystal's perfect structure began to break down. "The isotope disrupts their molecular bonds," she explained. "It's like acid to their crystalline form. No wonder they ran from our solar system. We're poisonous to them." Admiral Tom watched the crystal sample crumble. But why didn't they detect this threat sooner? They've been consuming worlds for months. They must have some way to scan planets before attacking. That's the interesting part. Dr. Wells pulled up new data. The effect only works when there's enough of the isotope present. A few humans wouldn't register as a threat. But a colony of thousands? That's enough to create a protective field that the Ravagers can sense. The Admiral's eyes widened with understanding. So that's why they fled from Mars colony. 2,000 humans in one place created a strong enough field to drive them away. Exactly. She showed him a map of the galaxy. "Look at this simulation. If we establish human colonies here, and here, we could create a barrier that the Ravagers can't cross. We could protect the galaxy using nothing but our natural biology." The implications were enormous. Humanity, the newest species in the galactic community, had accidentally evolved into the perfect defense against its greatest threat. The isotope in their bodies, formed by Earth's unique conditions, was a weapon that required no technology, no training, and no active use. Admiral Tom began making notes on his tablet. "The Council will want to start establishing colonies immediately. We'll need volunteers, ships, supplies." "Wait," Dr. Wells interrupted. "There's something else you need to see." She brought up her latest test results. The isotope's effect isn't just destructive. When exposed to lower concentrations, the crystals don't break down. They change. The display showed a time lapse of crystal samples exposed to varying amounts of the isotope. At high concentrations, they crumbled. But at lower levels, they reformed into new patterns, more complex than before. "I think," Dr. Wells hesitated, then continued, "I think we might be forcing them to evolve, to adapt. Every exposure to humans that doesn't destroy them could be changing them into something new." Admiral Tom stared at the changing crystal patterns. "Is that good news or bad news?" "I don't know," she admitted. "But we need to decide quickly. The Council is waiting for our recommendation on the colony plan." The Admiral looked at the galaxy map again, thinking about the responsibility that now rested on humanity's shoulders. They had found their species' hidden strength, but using it might have consequences nobody could predict. "Send the colony plan to the Council," he decided. "But mark it as Phase 1. They need to know this isn't just about defense anymore. We're about to change the galaxy forever." Dr. Wells nodded and began preparing the report. Outside her lab window, the red Martian sunset painted the sky in crystals of light, a reminder of the beautiful, deadly beings they were about to face or transform. The colony ship Atlas floated in space, its massive hull gleaming under the light of an alien sun. Inside, Captain Mike stood at the bridge window, watching as thousands of colonists prepared for humanity's boldest move yet. "First wave of shuttles ready for launch," his first officer reported. 2,000 colonists prepared for descent to New Eden. New Eden wasn't really a paradise. It was a rocky planet with thin air and weak gravity, but it had something more important: a perfect strategic location. Once settled, this human colony would form part of a barrier against the Ravagers' advance. Admiral Tom's report just came in, the communications officer announced. The Ravagers have changed course. They're heading this way. Mike nodded calmly. Right on schedule. They're testing us, just like we expected. He pressed the ship-wide communication button. Attention all colonists. Our guests are arriving early. Proceed with landing operations as planned. The shuttle bay doors opened, releasing streams of landing craft toward the planet's surface. Each one carried families, workers, and scientists, all volunteers who knew they were putting themselves directly in the path of the galaxy's greatest terror. Incoming transmission from Mars Colony, the comm officer said. Dr. Wells wants to speak with you. The scientist's face appeared on the main screen. She looked worried. Captain, the latest data shows the Ravagers are moving faster than predicted. They'll reach you in 6 hours, not 12. Understood. Mike kept his voice steady. We'll have the colony established by then. What's the minimum population needed for the isotope barrier? 1,000 humans in close proximity should create a strong enough field. She paused. But Captain, there's something else. The evolution effect I warned about. It's happening faster than we thought. Each exposure to human colonies is changing them more rapidly. Mike watched another wave of shuttles descend to New Eden. Can they break through the isotope barrier? Not yet, but they're learning. Be careful. The next 5 hours were a race against time. Shuttles flew back and forth, setting up prefab buildings and essential systems. The colonists worked with practiced efficiency, knowing their lives depended on having a functioning settlement before the Ravagers arrived. Sir, the sensor officer called out. Crystal formations detected at the edge of the system. They're bigger than anything we've seen before. Mike moved to the tactical display. The Ravagers had indeed grown. The smallest crystal now matched their largest colony ship, while the largest was nearly the size of a small moon. They moved through space in perfect formation, their surfaces reflecting starlight like deadly mirrors. All colonists accounted for, the first officer reported. 1,500 on the surface. Colony shield generators are active. Keep the remaining colonists on the Atlas, Mike ordered. If something goes wrong, we'll need a backup plan. The Ravagers entered the system's inner planets, their crystal bodies casting long shadows across space. Then, just as they approached New Eden's orbit, they stopped. They're scanning us, the sensor officer said. Energy readings are off the charts. Everyone on the bridge held their breath. This was the moment of truth. If Dr. Wells was right, the isotope field from the human colony would drive the Ravagers away. If she was wrong, the largest crystal formation suddenly pulsed with light. For a terrifying moment, Mike thought they were about to attack. Instead, the entire crystal swarm began to move backward, just as they had at Mars. It's working. Someone shouted. Cheers erupted across the bridge. But Mike noticed something strange. The Ravagers weren't fleeing in panic like before. Their retreat was orderly, almost deliberate. And as they moved away, their crystal structures flickered with new patterns, changing shape in ways they'd never seen before. He opened a channel to Mars. Dr. Wells, you need to see this. I think they're not just running away this time. They're studying us. The first human shield colony was a success, but as Mike watched the Ravagers disappear into deep space, he couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning. The real test was still to come. The emergency alarms on New Eden blared through the night. Captain Mike ran to the colony's control center, where the main screen showed what everyone had feared. The Ravagers had returned, and this time they weren't retreating. Status report, he demanded, watching the crystal formations take up attack positions around the planet. They're different, sir, his sensor officer replied. Look at their structure. It's not pure crystal anymore. The images showed how the Ravagers had changed. Their once perfect crystal bodies now had dark, metallic veins running through them. They moved differently too, no longer flowing like a school of fish, but positioning themselves like a trained military force. Incoming transmission from Mars colony, the communications officer announced. Dr. Wells' face appeared on screen, looking grave. "Captain, they've evolved exactly as we feared," she said. "Those metallic structures are quantum shields. They're trying to block the isotope's effects." A brilliant flash lit up the sky. One of the larger crystal formations had fired a beam of pure energy at the colony, but it stopped short, hitting the isotope barrier that naturally formed around the human settlement. "The shield is holding," Mike reported, "but they're not running away this time." "They're testing the barrier's strength," Dr. Wells said. "Each attack helps them understand it better. They're learning, adapting, evolving." Another blast hit the barrier, stronger than the first. The colony's lights flickered. Outside, colonists rushed to the emergency bunkers as more crystal ships moved into position. Admiral Tom's face joined the video conference. "We're seeing the same thing at other colonies. The Ravagers are attacking all human settlements simultaneously. They've developed some kind of coordinated strategy." Mike watched as the crystals repositioned themselves again. "They're not mindless anymore, are they? They're thinking, planning." "The isotope exposure forced them to evolve higher intelligence," Dr. Wells explained. "Every encounter with our colonies pushed them to adapt. We didn't just drive them away. We forced them to become something new." The next attack came from multiple directions at once. The barrier held, but sensors showed its strength was weakening. The Ravagers had discovered they could fire their energy weapons from just beyond the isotope's effective range. "All colonies report similar attacks," Admiral Tom said. "They're systematically testing our defenses, looking for weak points. This isn't random anymore. It's a siege." A massive explosion rocked the colony as the largest crystal ship fired a quantum blast. The barrier flickered dangerously, and warning signals flashed across the control panels. "We need to evacuate," Mike decided. "They'll break through eventually. We can't just sit here and wait." "No," Dr. Wells interrupted. "Look at their new formation. They're not trying to destroy the colony anymore. They're trying to contain it." She was right. The crystal ships had formed a perfect circle around New Eden, their weapons maintaining constant pressure on the barrier, but never firing at full strength. "They want to study us," she realized. "They've become curious. The isotope didn't just make them evolve physically. It gave them the ability to question, to wonder. They want to understand what makes us different." Another blast hit the barrier, but this one felt different. It wasn't an attack. It was a pattern, a signal. "They're trying to communicate," Mike whispered. Admiral Tom's expression hardened. "The question is, do we want to talk to something we created? Something that still has the power to destroy worlds, but now has the intelligence to use that power in ways we never imagined." The crystal ships continued their synchronized dance around New Eden, their new metallic veins glowing with contained energy. They were no longer the mindless destroyers that had terrorized the galaxy. They had become something else entirely. And now, they wanted to talk. Dr. Wells stood in her Mars laboratory, staring at the strange device on her workbench. It looked like a simple metal sphere, but inside was humanity's most desperate plan yet. "The isotope bomb is ready," she told Admiral Tom and Captain Mike through the video link. "But I don't know if we should use it." On the screens behind her, feeds from different human colonies showed the same scene. Massive crystal ships maintaining their siege positions, sending regular pulses of energy that seemed more like messages than attacks. "We may not have a choice," Admiral Tom said. 3 more colonies have reported barrier failures. The Ravagers haven't attacked, but they're moving closer, studying us like we're some kind of experiment." Captain Mike's colony on New Eden was still under the tightest siege. "Their signals are getting more complex," he reported. "Our computers think they're trying to create a common language. They want to talk to us, or they want us to think that." Admiral Tom's face was grim. "We can't forget what they did to 47 systems before they met us. All those worlds, All those people, gone. Dr. Wells picked up the isotope bomb carefully. This device will release a concentrated burst of the isotope that makes us toxic to them. At this strength, it won't just drive them away. It will shatter their entire structure. We could destroy all the Ravagers in a single system. The Admiral nodded. How many bombs can you make? That's the problem. She set the device down. We can only make 3. We need living human tissue to concentrate the isotope. And the process. She paused. The process kills the donor. Silence filled the video conference. 3 bombs meant 3 volunteers would have to die to create them. I'll do it, Captain Mike said quietly. If we need to use them, I'll be a first donor. No, Dr. Wells cut in. These bombs aren't just weapons. Each one contains a piece of human consciousness. The neural pattern of the donor gets encoded into the isotope structure. That's why we need living tissue. On the main screen, a new alert flashed. The Ravagers around New Eden had changed formation again, forming a complex geometric pattern in space. Their crystal surfaces pulsed with light in synchronized waves. They're not just evolving physically anymore, Dr. Wells realized. They're developing culture, mathematics, art. Everything we expose them to pushes them toward higher consciousness, which makes them more dangerous, Admiral Tom argued. A mindless swarm was bad enough, but now they're intelligent, organized, and still capable of consuming entire worlds. Captain Mike studied the pattern the crystal ships had made. Maybe that's why they haven't attacked. They know what we can do to them, but they're risking it anyway, just to understand us better. Dr. Wells looked at her isotope bomb again. They had created it to be the perfect weapon against the Ravagers, but using it would mean destroying creatures that were becoming more self-aware each day. Could they commit genocide against a species that they had accidentally helped evolve? There's another option, she said slowly. The neural patterns in the isotope bombs. We could use them differently. Instead of destroying the Ravagers, we could try to communicate with them, share our consciousness directly with theirs. That's suicide. Admiral Tom protested. Maybe. She picked up the bomb. Or maybe it's the next step in both our species' evolution. The Ravagers' pattern changed again, more complex than before. Their lights pulsed faster, like a heartbeat growing stronger. They had to decide quickly, use the bombs as weapons and destroy the Ravagers forever, or risk everything on the chance to communicate with the very beings that had once terrorized the galaxy. The fate of 2 species now rested on a single choice. The modified isotope bomb floated in space between the human colony and the Ravager fleet. Dr. Wells had volunteered her own consciousness for this final attempt at communication, despite Admiral Tom's strong objections. Neural pattern stable, reported the medical officer on Mars, monitoring her vital signs. Ready for transmission. Captain Mike watched from New Eden's control center as the crystalline ships moved closer to the device. Their complex patterns had grown even more intricate, forming shapes that seemed to represent mathematical concepts and abstract ideas. They understand what we're trying to do, he said softly. They're ready. Admiral Tom's voice came through the comm system. Dr. Wells, this is your last chance to abort. Once we activate the device, there's no going back. Dr. Wells lay in the medical chamber on Mars, her mind already connected to the isotope matrix. We have to know. Admiral, we have to understand what we created. The device activated, releasing a gentle pulse of modified isotope particles. Instead of destroying the crystal structures, it carried Dr. Wells' neural patterns into the heart of the Ravager fleet. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the largest crystal ship began to glow with a new kind of light. Patterns of energy flowed through its metallic veins, forming shapes that looked almost like human brainwaves. Connection established, the medical officer announced. Dr. Wells' consciousness is linking with their network. Through the neural link, Dr. Wells found herself in a space that wasn't physical. The Ravager's consciousness surrounded her like an ocean of crystal thoughts and diamond dreams. And for the first time, She understood. They were children, her voice whispered through the comm system. The Ravagers. They were just children. Newborns. Learning. Growing. Consuming because they didn't know any better. The crystal ships moved in perfect synchronization, their surfaces reflecting her thoughts back to the human observers. Images formed in the space between them, memories of their first awakening in the void between galaxies, their instinctive consumption of matter and energy, and their sudden, frightening encounter with humans that forced them to grow up. The isotope didn't just hurt them, Dr. Wells continued. It was like a parent teaching a child through tough love. Each exposure forced them to think, to adapt, to become more than what they were. Captain Mike watched in awe as the crystal ships began to change shape, forming structures of impossible beauty. They're showing us what they want to become, he realized. Through Dr. Wells' connection, the Ravagers shared their new understanding. They had evolved from mindless consumers into conscious beings, capable of creation instead of just destruction. The human isotope had been the key that unlocked their potential for growth. They want to rebuild, Dr. Wells said, her voice filled with wonder. All the worlds they destroyed. They understand now. They want to use their power to create new worlds, new possibilities. They want to work with us. Admiral Tom's skepticism came through clearly. Can we trust them? The answer came not in words, but in actions. The crystal ships around New Eden began to reshape themselves, forming structures that could house both their crystalline forms and organic life. They were offering to share their technology, their knowledge, their new understanding of the universe. They're not the terror of the galaxy anymore, Dr. Wells said. They're its newest children. And like all children, they needed guidance to grow up. As the neural connection faded, Dr. Wells returned to her own consciousness with tears in her eyes. The Ravagers had changed forever, and so had humanity's role in the galaxy. They were no longer just defenders against a mindless threat. They had become teachers, guides, partners in the evolution of a new form of life. The crystal ships settled into orbit around New Eden, their shapes now a perfect blend of their original nature and their new consciousness. The species that had once terrorized the galaxy had become something entirely new. And it all began because humans, the newcomers to galactic society, carried within them not just the power to destroy their greatest enemy, but the ability to help it grow into something more. The terror was over. The future had begun.